So the next step in our model is going to be to add some planting. Now I know that different people with different computer specs and different preferences have different approaches to this. There are, of course, the approaches where people have quite sophisticated plugins. You have your tree storm, you have several different professional packages that you can buy and use in 3ds Max. What I'm going to show you is a slightly more low poly version, as well as a simpler approach, just to get a good feeling of what some planting would look like when you're doing views or shots that are quite far away. Obviously what I'm using is going to be not really suitable for those eye-level close-up shots, so let's just take it at that. We're going to be creating quick rendering, low poly objects, palm trees and bushes. Just for the sake of showing you the examples, one will be a 3D model taken from a downloaded source online. It's all free and is accessible to you if you download the file. The link will be provided, I believe, in the files for you under this chapter, so you can look out for that. Then the bush that we will be doing will just be a plainer, simple bush. It will just be a billboard style, very classic and traditional, the old school way. So for the diffuse, we're going to be using this diffuse here. And for the opacity, we're going to be using just a normal black and white. So let's get started. First thing we're going to do in a new scene is we're going to import that file that we have found online. So we found import, and it's going to be in Palm. So this is a object file. So it's going to give us an import dialog. I'm just going to skip this part. I'm just going to select everything. I'm not going to worry about scale. I'm going to rescale it in Max once it comes in, since we always get unpredictable results. Now what I get is an untextured version with a couple of palm trees. So I could choose to use every single one of them, but just for the sake of getting this exercise done quickly, I'm going to delete these and just show you what it looks like with one of them. Now on the side, we're still going to use this billboard model, and we're going to model that right now just using plain, simple planes. So we're going to go ahead and create a plane. And our billboard is actually 1000 by 1000 pixels, so we know that it's square, so our plane that we create is going to be square as well. Now the first thing I need to do before I even model that is to check what scale this came in. If I go in the front view and I use the tape measuring tool, I will see that it came in at 0.5 meters, which is about 10 times too small. So I'm going to just click on scale here, and I'm going to scale up this by 10 times. So this will give me a palm tree which is 5 meters high. And I'm now going to work on the small billboard bush at the bottom. And each of these will then add and reproduce in our scene. So the plane, let's make it 1.5 by 1.5. And we don't really need any subdivisions on it, so let's just right click that and get rid of it. Now let's just texture this before we go and rotate it up and copy it. So we're going to be creating textures both for the palm tree and for this billboard bush. So let's open up our material editor. Here I've already made some, so let's just remake them from scratch. So first we're going to be making the palm tree. So let's start with a V-Ray material, and we can actually copy that immediately to the second slot. And I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger for us to see. This one's going to be called palm, and this one is going to be called bush. So in the palm, we will choose a diffuse of the palm leaves that are provided. And if we scroll down and open up the maps section, we can go across to opacity and select the opacity bitmap, which is provided for that, the black and white one. We can then go and apply that to the palm tree, and we need to create a separate material for the trunk. So that we can drag this viewer material down to here, and we can call this one trunk. Now you'll notice that I'm not adding too much detail to these textures. I'm not using any reflection for my sake. I'm not using double-sided materials with any opacity, translucency, none of that. I'm just going for the crude, raw, basic version, which is going to render extremely quickly. So you'll see by default there is some mapping. This is a little bit stretched, but for our purposes, it's good enough just for our distant views, and at least for this exercise. Then the bush texture, we're going to use the bush diffuse, which is this one here. Let's go into the planting folder, the bush diffuse, and let's go down across to opacity, and let's set the opacity to that black and white image, and let's apply that to that square. Now we don't even need to map it because the square is exactly the same size as the texture, as long as it's proportionally correct. Now let's rotate this up by 90 degrees just by selecting E and rotating. There we go, and then rotate this 60 degrees and instance it twice. So that'll give us a little bush object here that we can then spread around our scene. So the bush object, I'm simply going to group it. I'm going to call it bush 001, since we're likely to have more than 100. And the palm tree object, what we're going to do is we're going to create a proxy of it. I know there aren't a lot of polygons to it, but let's just do the proxy anyway. First, what we need to do is we need to attach the two objects together. So I'm going to convert to editable poly, right click attach, and click on the palm tree leaves, and then just leave it at default settings and say OK. Then the most important part is to take a note of what the material is going to be for that, since it'll create a new multi-sub material. So these two we can actually discard. And this will now be our new palm tree material. So now for the proxy, all we have to do is we need to right click and say V-Ray Mesh Export, and we can export it to the desktop or anywhere else you choose, and just press OK. Immediately you'll be able to go into your object dialog, geometry, scroll down to V-Ray. When you're in the standard primitive section, scroll down to V-Ray, click V-Ray Proxy. Now just test out that everything is looking correct by clicking on the palm tree, and you'll see that immediately the proxy is in place. You'll notice that the base point is in the same place, so perhaps we want to move that across. And most importantly, you want to attach that, or at least load that material that we eyedropped from here onto that new model. Now these two are going to be called 06 planting. And we can go and delete this object. We can make the trees look green. And we're ready to go and save these two objects out into an internal model folder. And we can call them palm tree and bush. So I'm going to stop the video here. What we've done so far is we've just imported the original object model and we've textured it, as well as created the little simple billboard bush that we're now going to bring into our model and reproduce around. So in the next video, we'll actually be doing the copying process of these bushes, and we'll get to that in 1 second.